Good afternoon. I hope you have your coffee. I'm just overwhelmed with pleasure here to be together again with all of you and see if we can carry the dialogue, our quest. I don't want to overemphasize the 17th letter of the alphabet, but we're on a quest here. We're trying to improve our questions. We would not be so presumptuous to have had the answers. And so consequently, I'm pleased to be here again with Reverend David William Parry, the eloquent author of a wonderful book about Manuel Swedenborg and sundry other subjects. We'll chat about that later on. He's received copies of my books, and he's had a chance to gaze at them, just a cursory gaze, I'm sure. I'm not sure how you're planning on approaching it, but it's a challenging subject, but well worth the developmental task that's involved, because ultimately being encountered with that type of a task, that's developmental. And that's the dilemma in my mind that we're up against, because people, going back to the old adage of Albert Einstein having to try and fix a problem from the state of consciousness that one created it is exercise of futility. I'm merely paraphrasing, but that's basically the dilemma when we're living in a world to where people are championing the ideas of what I consider to be anti-heroes like Jeremy Bentham and Karl Marx. And I know that there's some aspects of Jeremy Bentham that many right-minded Londoners especially cherish, because he did champion some good things. But he was the avowed atheist who consequently was unable to admit the existence of the supersensible. And in the light of spiritual science, when one does that, essentially what one does is deny oneself access to the christened ego, which is your I am, the I am that I am of the burning bush and of the baptism of Christ. And so the indwelling spirit does not dwell within the utilitarianism, as Jeremy Bentham was wont to call it. And in fact, he had his body mummified, and it's in a glass case in University College, London. It's his final resting place. And so there you have it. You have this desiccated corpse of the representative of British desiccation of thought. And why would I say that? Because Jeremy Bentham is a character that has achieved certain things that one would definitely want to say good things about, but it's interesting because there was a psychobiographical study by Philip Lucas and Anne Sharon, and they consider that Jeremy Bentham had Asperger's syndrome, which I think is kind of hilarious, actually, considering he was a bit of a crotchety old soul, but given to flights of fancy and romance. But nonetheless, he was a social reformer, but his axiom, and the thing that makes it problematic is he said, it is the greatest happiness of the greatest number that is the measure of right and wrong. And so he's considered a leading theorist in Anglo-American philosophy of law. But nonetheless, you say, well, gee, what's wrong with that? Then that would, the counter thought to that would be the greatest evil would be the good going to the fewest number, and that's kind of a quandary right there. And but if you go to some lectures that Rudolf Steiner gave, I believe it was in 1916. He gave a series of 16 lectures that are considered to be perhaps his most advanced lecture series. It's been published as Eternal and Transient Elements, the Cosmic Past of Humanity, and the Mystery of Evil. It's in Collected Works of Volume 184, which is an interesting continuation of the comparison of the impacts of Jesuitism. But nonetheless, if you look at this more closely, you'll see that what he's getting at is that when an individual refuses to accept the reality of the spiritual world, what it does is it creates an other realm that's known as the eighth sphere, that's not connected to the truth of evolution. And so it creates this like slag that's a remnant at the end of the fulfillment of the septenary chain, the sevenfold chain of evolution, of which the particular planet we're on right now, Earth, is the fourth stage, as I've made the point frequently. The conversation I had with Thomas Binyaki, the spokesman of the Hopi Elders, and he agreed with me that the Earth is the fourth world. In other words, we're humans. The fourth stage is human. The fifth stage is angel. The sixth stage is archangel. And the seventh stage is archai, or time spirit. And you say, well, why would that be relevant? Well, these are forces that play into our lives at all times, but we're just not aware of it. It's something that works in us unconsciously. And say we're somebody, a materialist of the type of atheists, Jeremy Bentham or Karl Marx, then one would always conclude unfailingly that humans were the source of all the inspiration in the world, and that there was no inspiration coming from the supersensible realms, which is something that an ancient Egyptian would actually laugh at. In fact, they really don't even have a clear concept of history other than this archetypal interchange with the supersensible. And so consequently, since we've entered the modern era in 1413, people have moved into the consciousness soul age. And so consequently, it's our greatest, on one level, isolation from the spiritual content of the spiritual world that we receive. But on the other extent, it's also called the spiritual soul by Rudolf Steiner. And it becomes the greatest potential for the unfoldment of the beginning stages of our re-entry into a conscious relationship with the spiritual world, as opposed to our unconscious now. And it becomes a little bit difficult, but we'll be exploring some of these topics today, and in our usual lighthearted manner. And I have to be careful not to go on and on. David, so continue on, my friend.
Good afternoon to you, Cocker. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a light-hearted manner. I'm an absolute devotee of Schiller, who even the demigod Hegel admitted was a proper philosopher. You know, what's wrong with play? What's wrong with fun? What's wrong with the creative instinct? I mean, he would have said that the creative instinct is at the source of all human creativity. You know, play, fun, imagination, fantasy is actually the lack of distinction in the modern world between fantasy and imagination, which I'm always droning on about in this country. And by the way, Brits, I intend to drone on about it for many years to come. I mean, because both things are important, but they're different. As that wonderful preamble. That's the preamble of an American gentleman at his best, I think. It reminded me of two things. Famous old British grouches, old British buggers of our time. The composer Delius, who was extraordinary, running around the country with his endless notebooks, trying to write down British folklore and putting them to music, was a notoriously moody old bugger who people couldn't talk to and would always be finding fault with everyone around him. But it's Delius, for heaven's sake, it's Delius. Jeremy Bentham, I've got a famous photograph of me somewhere stood by the mummy of Jeremy Bentham. I was, as an undergraduate, sort of slightly postgraduate, I got thrown out of a lecture. Someone was talking about something to do with macroeconomics. It was many years ago. I can't remember the wherewithal. And someone asked my opinion, and I said, well, Jeremy Bentham's outside. Perhaps we should consult him. And by the way, I think he's the only person to make an interesting contribution today. So I was quickly asked to leave because, of course, he'd been dead for some time. Atheists. I'm never freaked out by atheism. What I take exactly what you say. I think there's an unfortunate blindness to the supersensible, which slowly filters into that type of thought world, and that intrigues me. It horrifies me. It's something that needs a lot of analysis by all of us, I think. Some of them, I mean, I can only speak of your sort of typical wildebeest, the British atheist, as opposed to international atheists. And some of them are quite strange creatures because they have over here deeply spiritual lives, but they wouldn't be able to make sense of religion. I mean, I don't think Bentham was one of those. I think your analysis is absolutely correct. How willful on his part that decision was actually intrigues me. I mean, why would somebody willfully work against a part of themselves? But like Bentham and Marx. I mean, when Marx was a mere student and Hegel was giving him F grades because Hegel didn't feel he understood what the lesson had been about. All of which we've got to remember. I'm sorry, Marx. This is not really what I was saying. I don't know. I mean, there was something to Bentham. I mean, his concern that we had to maximize the positive. I think, let's always look. I can't remember which part of Shakespeare that comes from. The Duke sees books in brooks and good in all things. I can't remember where that is at the moment. I think we're going to get that set back in our lives. Was Jeremy Bentham a monster? To my mind, no. But he had a sad blindness to many vital and fundamental things in our lives. I do agree with that, absolutely. In terms of Marx, again, to my understanding, there's also a picture floating around somewhere of me underneath the big bust of Marx near his tomb. Of course, it's actually not near his tomb because vandals used to break into Highgate Cemetery and paint him various colours. So they actually moved the bust of Marx to another part of the cemetery, which was much more difficult to get to. So there's a picture of me trying to look reverential underneath the near the grave of Karl Marx, but of course it's not. And again, I suppose the fact that two things with him. I mean, he was worried about social justice. I wish more people nowadays were worried about social justice. That's a huge impetus in him, and that's not a mild or an insignificant thing. And secondly, of course, I'm always haunted by a remark he made in one of his last books. I can never remember which one. So I'm having one of those days, troops, where he actually says to his readers, "Thank God I'm not a Marxist." So we've got to remember there are many levels to all of this. As for me, no, I suppose I'm caught between Kierkegaard, who haunts me endlessly. I never read him before going to university. I think that was a great weakness of mine, particularly maybe as clergy, because The Works of Love is one of the most extraordinary books I've ever read. And if you're looking at either or to do with Christianity, where he's basically saying, look, either it's true or it's not, which is very gutsy. We need to think, I'm not against the modern world. I think the levels of discourse we're all going into demand endless refinement and sophistication. But let's face it, I mean, my wonderful friend John, that's one of the selling points of this show. The fact that you can get inside stuff, and you can read books, and it is exciting, and you can have an intelligent conversation. And what's wrong with culture and art and all the rest of it, and endless spiritual discussion? Absolutely nothing. It's fun. It's glorious. It makes us human. And as I say, weirdly, it always leads me back in certain way to Schiller, which is, I suppose, the other Maha guru in my life. And that eventually, of course, led to me staging certain things on the British stage. No, I think we've got to accentuate the positive. We've got to put everything in context. I mean, Bentham, outside of the context of his time and the context of what he was trying to achieve in terms of social justice, is scary and heartless. The bit that worries me in his particular case is, of course, most British politicians, whether they admit it or not, are actually working on that basis. Let's learn how to maximize the secondary and the lower pleasures of the majority as far as that's possible, and creating mistake after mistake after mistake based on that line of thinking, and robbing children of a decent education, because all you need now in British schools is to basically be able to write your name at the top of a piece of paper, then go out and work. We've missed the richness that you allude to in those wonderful books of yours, which I have started reading. We miss what Steiner was saying. We miss what Swedenborg was saying. And we miss the quality of life as opposed to the quantity of life. One of the things that's worried me so much about the COVID-19 experience, I'm not one of the arch skeptics that thinks nothing is happening, but it's certainly been made into a political issue and used politically. So we've got to start thinking, okay, what sort of world are we moving into? And let's take a step back from Jeremy Bentham if it's all leading in that direction. What do you think, John?
Well, it brings up a key issue, and that's addressed by a fellow we refer to over and over, John Stuart Mill, on liberty, his book on liberty. The problematic aspect of John Stuart Mill is he's so akin to Jeremy Bentham. And so what you have is this kind of strain of humanism. And that's the attributing of everything that has to do with being a human being is the result of human beings. And that's the rub. And this is a riddle that I'm posing that it can't even be broached, can't even be approached unless you make a specific study of that which pertains to the supersensible. And consequently, the average individual would say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And that's exactly my point, is that you don't. You've lost the language of the supersensible. At one time, it was within the evolution of mankind and within the esoteric stream of Dionysius the Areopagite, the first bishop of Athens, who was a disciple and convert through St. Paul. You have to understand that there's the reality of the angelic hierarchy, of which Paul was so conversant, because being an initiated Jew, when he had his experience on the road to Damascus, where he was blinded by the light with the appearance of Christ in his resurrection body, that you either have to approach that as a reality or as some kind of fiction that has like a moral to the story, which is how it would be approached by many people today. And consequently, they're missing the boat on understanding reality. And it's like the conversation that J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were having on the day of C.S. Lewis's conversion. And C.S. Lewis made reference to the biblical stories as being myths, but it was Tolkien who said to him, but it's true. And for whatever reason, probably a prompting of the spiritual world, but Lewis had the realization that here he was, a subject of which he was absolutely thoroughly conversant in, because it wasn't like he was one of those people who was agnostic at best, but had no knowledge of scripture, and so it didn't really play a role in his thinking. But here's somebody who's Oxford Don, who's made a thorough study of the impact of scripture on the development of British culture and blah, 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 right? And so he really does know what's in the book. And then to have the realization, oh my God, it's true. I mean, that's almost a appalling eureka moment there. And consequently, there's a winnowing that's happening right now, and people are being confronted with the option. Do you worship the state and the laws of utilitarianism, and you're willing to sacrifice all for the many and jump on the Bernie Sanders train and get more free stuff, right? Or are you going to acknowledge the reality of the working of Christ that can only unfold in a wholesome way if we have the freedom to take up the task, to take up the cross and experience our own climb up the mountain of Calvarium. And what is the Calvarium? Well, that's Calvary. On one level, you say, well, here comes the Calvary. At another level, it's Calvarium, which means the skull, the place of the skull. And so it's this mystery of birth and of death. And that's what's being given here. And so consequently, to solve that riddle, it's necessary to try and bring oneself into relationship of the mystery of birth and of death. And to crack that mystery, one has to go into the realm of the mini death, which is when you go to sleep at night. And so consequently, what is going on while you're asleep, when you're unconscious? And those are the realms in which the higher beings dwell. And likewise, if we go back, as I've made mention, except ye be as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. And that's clearly stating the supersensible reality that from the beginning of when you became self-conscious and were able to say, oh, here I am, usually most people can go back to about age 3. Were you to go back before that, you would be able to perceive the workings of the higher supersensible beings, the beings, the ninefold hierarchies, the whole choir of the angelic hierarchy, and the profound work that they've done on your behalf to help bring about a transformation of your nature so that you could take up the task of being a bearer of Christ, a Christophorus, one who bears the Christ. And what is that Christ? That's the individual ego. That's the I am. And consequently, many people they rarely function out of that particular principle. And what principle is that? Well, you could call that the fourth principle, which ties into the fourth mystery, the mystery of birth and death, and the mystery of Calvarium. And so consequently, you die daily, in essence, when you go to sleep. And so we're one to achieve through their esoteric path of development to bring to consciousness these realms. That's what would take place. You have to be able to get beyond that ring past knot. And how does one do that? Well, when you begin to approach spiritual science, if you use Jeremy Bentham thinking, you can't even read the books. And I can't tell you how many secular personalities that I know that have been given Rudolf Steiner's works, because remember, I worked at the Mayflower, and so we were the largest outlet for Rudolf Steiner's works in the world at the time, or in the English-speaking world. People that speak English tend to think that the English-speaking world is the world. But consequently, some people would, on occasion, they come back and go, sorry, I can't do it. I get to the end of the paragraph and I don't know what he just said. And they don't understand that you're building something. That's the Grail. It's to build a receptacle to receive the content of the supersensible. That is the path of the Grail. Now, Grail has been described as a great many things. Centrally, the cup of Joseph of Arimathea that was used at the Eucharist when he consecrated the bread and wine and said, do this in memory of me. And so there is a sacred mission there, a sacerdotal mission, which David is perhaps far more qualified to speak, because for me, all I know is that one time when I participated in the consecration of the Eucharist, the communion, that I was healed of a malady that I had had for many years, and it was gone by the next day. And so it has a miraculous relationship to my personal biography. So I've had the good fortune of had the intervention of the supersensible many times. To me, it's a fact as far as my own experience. And so I feel humbled and honored to be able to say such a thing, and I'm not looking down on people that aren't coming from where I'm coming from. Don't think that at all. I'm trying to understand them, and to understand, you have to be able to lower oneself and serve the situation, like a priest, a good priest, like David. And I'm not sure I know what I just said.
Oh gosh, what's the scripture? Call none good but God. Call none good but God. I mean, I'm trying. I try and keep open-minded. Unlike many people in my trade, I try and keep open-minded. Because what other way is there to behave? I mean, I remember reading Robert Browning's poem, I think it's titled Kashish, many years ago, where you have the little Islamic doctor who doesn't understand everything, but knows one day under all good Allah, things will make sense. That's such a lovely attitude. That's such a lovely attitude. We need to recover things like that. I'm in a mood today to accentuate the positive, John. Certainly in terms of organized religion, I think we need it. I'm sorry, that's not just me as a pastor saying that. I have benefited personally from the checks and balances and turbulence of church life. There's always the temptation, if you're not like you. I mean, you're a seeker. You're on the path. You're very au fait. You're struggling with Steinerian mysteries and that knowledge. My worry isn't, as a pastor, curiously, good friends and colleagues like you. It's people that live down the road from me, as an example, who wouldn't know what either of us were talking about and wouldn't know why it's important in their lives, even though somewhere at the back of their minds that haunts them. And I don't know, church gets too much stick nowadays. If you go into a church, yes, there's normally the gossipy wife of the pastor, the minister. Yes, you've got the old woman that will insult you to your face. You know, yes, you've got the grouchy old guy that will find fault. But all of that's part of being human. It's part of life. And you know, there's the real danger with modern Christianity, and there's nothing more hot than the mysteries of Christianity. We're as old as all the others. If we take in the Jewish inheritance, we're just as old as all the other traditions. You know, and there's nothing that wasn't known to mystics like the circle drawer in Palestine of the I can't remember because there were a couple of them. The one I'm thinking of, I think, is the 1st century. You know, there's no Hindu Brahmin that knew more than him. He may have known as much as him, but not more. The mystics, the magicians, the explorers, the seers of our culture know as much as the others, and dare I suggest, sometimes say there's even a higher level, which of course we would call Christ. Therefore, you know, what's the first step to that? Throwing yourself into a Christian community so you're not given to fantasy. You know, I am the most sacred person on this earth. Everyone should listen to what I'm saying. You know, and it's one of the dangers of the spiritual life. And it's okay because that it shows you're beginning to walk the path. But you need the grouchy old guy in the church and you need the gossipy wife of the minister to be able to set you straight. You're having a great experience. By the way, you're still human, you're still imperfect, and you're one of us. I think all that's great. The mysteries of Christianity are linked with community. I mean, I've never really seen a way around that. I don't really think it's wise or helpful to look for a way around that unless you're called to the very rare charism of being a monastic or a nun. I know lots of people in the modern Christian community have trouble with that calling. Personally, I don't. I mean, I can see the real benefits. I mean, it's certainly not for me, but I can see the benefits and I can see the wisdom that come from somebody, male or female, who has been asked to take that path by spirit and has thrown themselves into it. And they seem to develop over the years a natural serenity and ever more deeper forms of wisdom for the benefit of the wider Christian community. So I can see why that is important. I can see why that needs exploring and treasuring. I mean, I'm reminded, I suppose, of the Buddhist Sangha, you know, the monk class, the monastic class. No one's pretending they're perfect, but I can't really think of any monk I've ever met or any nun I've ever met that would say they were perfect. I mean, they all struck me as very down-to-earth, reliable, decent people with a particular vocation in life. You know, the Sangha is meant to represent, but not embody, because we're all human, the striving for higher consciousness and the striving for a more moral life. What worries me, I suppose, in certain churches, who's to blame for people running away from modern church? All of us, church people, we're to blame. It's an unwelcoming environment. It never goes out of its way to be human. And it's turned God into, I think I've said this before, into some sort of nitpicking Latin master that's giving us all an exam, which most of us fail. You know, how on earth is that attractive? Instead of a God of love and of wisdom. I mean, that is innately attractive. That's exciting. That's challenging. That's inspiring. You know, as Swedenborg would have said, if you're not looking at love and wisdom, you're not really looking at God. I just go along with that. You know, so at the risk of slightly disagreeing with Kierkegaard, I the Christian or not, but it doesn't mean either my view of Christianity is true or not. Which is, by the way, I did understand about Bernie Sanders. People keep telling me about Bernie Sanders offering free stuff. I follow America. I mean, I'm only a Brit. Apparently, he's 1 minute he's saying he.
Unfortunately, your signal dropped off, and so we just have a freeze frame of you looking mildly, pleasantly exasperated. And that's okay. I'm sure you'll return shortly. If not, if you could still hear me. Yeah, here he comes, maybe.
I think I'm back.
There you are.
Yeah, there I'm like, God,
Continue.
you swine demonic powers, you won't stop me talking. You know, so oh my God, it was one of Bernie Sanders' agents. I mean, is he a socialist or not? Because I think it's really quite easy to work out. But, you know, in terms of Christianity, we've been given these deep, golden, rosy mysteries, you know, for us to explore through our lifetimes. And if you listen to some church groups, many of which sadly are in America, you know, I was thinking the other day, a Southern Baptist friend of mine, you know, I'm not against Southern Baptists, all attack me after the show, I don't care. You know, someone who was going to be a pastor with the Southern Baptist was given this over 100-point checklist of doctrine that he had to agree with intimately before they'd even consider him. I mean, did that happen to the apostles? You know, did Paul say, by the way, can we all sit down now and I've got a 5-hour exam for everybody? No, it was, you know, it was in their lives, it was in their hearts, it was in their minds. And of course, the people that intrigue me most are the Christians that become creative, like Rudolf Steiner, a great man in theatre, a great man in the arts. You know, apart from his sort of, what would we call it nowadays, biodynamic work, you know, the work in economics, the work in politics, I mean, which I need to get much more acquainted with. But certainly the work in the arts is something I read of and read through many years ago. It's when the Christian mind starts becoming openly and unrepentantly creative and realize we've nothing to be afraid of. That's when things get very interesting for me. That's my bit, John, and I hope the Sanders people don't cut me off again.
Well, yeah, because there is that. If you look and you have to admit, even a hard-boiled utilitarian fount like Jeremy Bentham would have to concede that the greatest composers were not atheists. And so, and if you look at the way they approached their creativity, it's smacks of the supersensible. I mean, Mozart, for example, he considered himself, he was taking dictation, you know. And if you listen to Mozart, I don't know about you, but I would have a bit of a quandary if I was expected to do the level of artistic representation that he did with his dictation, starting from age 6, by the way. And so he was very early on, and you can go back and you can listen to his childhood works, and there, you know, he's meeting the mark on everything. There's nothing childish about his childlike compositions. And so consequently, and then you get to like Beethoven, okay, who was buddies with our frequently referenced friend, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. One day they were walking through the park and they came upon a group of nobility, and you know, Goethe was very much embedded in that kind of society. You know, he was an administrator for the Duke. And so consequently, when they came upon this little bevy of the nobility, Goethe respectfully bows, and the nobility walks by, and Beethoven's standing there with his arms crossed. And Goethe looks at him like, what are you doing? You know, it's like, because, you know, Goethe's going to have to deal with these people, you know, and Beethoven says, they should be bowing to us. So that's Beethoven for you. He was a true firebrand, and he came like lightning, and like lightning he went out. And but if I've given the story before, but I'll tell it again because it's so much fun because Goethe, in the correspondence that was collected by his secretary Eckermann, and it's published as Conversations with Eckermann, and he tells the story of Goethe showing, because he had original handwritten manuscripts of both Beethoven and Mozart. And he shows Mozart, and it's just like perfect. I mean, it's just as if he's some monastic copyist, just writing out something that was laying on a piece of paper before him. So all of his musical works are just perfectly, every dot and tittle is in order. And then he pulls out Beethoven's, and there's whole passages scratched out, and there's coffee or tea stains and scribbles and margin notes of him complaining at himself. No, not that. So he's kind of like going through an Asperger's fit, deciding how to resolve a key signature and or a rhythmic change, and it's a struggle, and in both of them you could see this dynamic of the struggles of the supersensible realities that stood behind them. That these are Olympian figures. These are figures that are not only participating in their own personal struggle, but they've risen to the state, to the archangelic realm, to where they are representing on earth something that's receiving the inspiration of the folk soul, of that archangelic realm of the folk soul, where humanity is a part of something that they share, and even beyond that, into being into the realm of the archive, the spirit of the age. So that you'd have to say that the works of both Mozart and Beethoven are representing the spirit of the age, representing the inspiration that can come to one while one is in the realm of sleep, and also within the realm of death, to where it can even go beyond that into the higher levels of hierarchy, beyond what's called the third hierarchy, which is the archangel archive. And so consequently, in looking at these things and looking at the impact that they were able to have, because in order for somebody to really come to an appreciation of music, you have to find something in yourself that resonates with what that is. I mean, I'm sure you'll give me that. And so consequently, people have to lift themselves up to be able to create something that's capable of receiving what is being offered to them, whether it be the emotional depth of Beethoven or the refinement of Mozart. And then consequently, you can carry it further into the realm of language with Richard Wagner. And you bring up Buddha. Richard Wagner, at the end of his life, had begun work, or was planning on doing an opera about the life of the Buddha. And it's interesting that he made comments that it was through working on the opera of Parsifal and also moving towards this whole Buddha experience. What is this Buddha thing, And exploring that, and exploring the dynamic majesty of the Christ impulse, he overcame a lot of his curmudgeonly features within his personality. His Semitism, for example, he had struggled with being anti-Semitic. He couldn't get along, and he said that he had overcome that through working on Parsifal. So it's interesting, because in Parsifal, what happens? You see at the end that there's this harmonious accord that develops between him and the culture of the East, shall we say, so that there's a resolution of that crusade dynamic, which is quite interesting in that Parsifal is representative of that stream of Christianity, which is embedded within the mysteries of the Knights Templar and the Crusades and all of that, so that you have within Parsifal the merging of the mysteries of the East, the inward mysteries, with the mysteries of King Arthur, which is an external cosmic mystery, seeing the workings of the Logos in nature and the workings within the spiritual beings that were people could perceive. They would give them names in the ancient periods, all these various names that we hear about. I'm not one to think that all these names that they came up with, they were talking about nothing. That there was something that they could be aware of in their conscious mind, of which we are no longer conscious. And so consequently, I had made the comment to Dr. Fisher, the Egyptologist that I worked for many years, that it had become clear to me that the Egyptologists had no knowledge of occultism. And she says, oh, no, a lot of them, the figure that, oh, well, because they've read the Hermetic writings, well, that's a start, okay? But they don't really understand the evolutionary schemata. And if you take that evolutionary theme of which I made reference to regarding the Hopi tradition of the Earth being the fourth world, there's no evidence of that in the interpolations, I'll call them, of the Egyptologists that I encountered. Actually, some of the ones that are dealing with the Ptolemaic and Greco-Roman Egypt are much better. I think that because most of them are conversant in the Neoplatonic writers, Iamblichus and Plotinus and Proclus and all of those wonderful souls that are almost impossible to read at this day and age for the average individual. But I've had a fondness for many years, and they were some of the biggest influences of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is an American that represents the American folk soul, and being able to actually take language and bring it into a modern idiom, dropping off the these, thines, and thous of the archaicisms of language. They're gone. So it began with him, and Nathaniel Hawthorne, of course. But we can go on and on. But getting back to this level of inspiration, Rudolf Steiner makes the point that, of course, that you have a physical body that you share with the mineral realm. You have an etheric body of memory, and the dynamism of your organism is through the etheric body. You share that with the realm of the plants, and that's in like a dream stage, so that or dreamless. And when you get in, you see you have your waking ego, and then you dream in the astral, deep dreamless sleep in the etheric, and trance in the physical body. So that's those stages of consciousness relative to those vehicles. But you share the astral body with the animals because you have motion, but you share the etheric body with the realm of the plants. But the ego, the I am, is uniquely human. And it's through participating in that element that we receive through the agency of Christ that you become human. The goal of Earth evolution is to complete human evolution. But if you don't take up the task of your humanity, then something else comes in. And see, your fundamentalists that you refer to, they like to put like it's Christ versus the devil. They have this monarchy and duality that they struggle with. But Rudolf Steiner makes the point, no, the struggle is Lucifer against Satan, Lucifer and Ahriman, and Christ is the principle that can balance out those two extremes. And consequently, Christ is above the fray. He's the light that casts no shadow, whereas Lucifer is the light that casts a shadow. The shadow is the shadow of Ahriman, of Sauron, of the battle in Middle Earth. He wants to like totally envelop the world in darkness, whereas the Lucifer is phosphorus. He wants, it's that false light that doesn't participate in the primal impulses that came forth from the Logos, from the beginning, from the Word, that manifested through the agency of the spirits of form, the Elohim, specifically the Eloah, Jehovah of the Old Testament. And so that's that moon impulse of the Old Testament is the understanding of the book of generations, so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. And the Logos using that as the Grail to receive the incarnation of Christ, and that the whole idea of the Messiah was that the highest spiritual being that had ever came into earth evolution entered with the incarnation of Christ at the baptism, and now he's here. And there are those that have the experience of seeing him within the etheric world. But if you don't have supersensible capacities, you won't have that experience. That's what happened to Paul. He didn't see a physical guy walk up like a politician and shake his hand. No, he had a supersensible experience of Christ within the etheric. It presaged the experience that have become a more common event amongst mankind, where they have this experience of Christ as the supersensible being. And so that's what I'm working
on. I keep forgetting my mute and unmute. I keep forgetting my mute and unmute. Oh gosh, I mean, there's so much to comment on there. I suppose, yeah, I'm accentuating the positive today, although this is the wrong way round. I'm meant to be talking about more art, you're meant to be talking about techie stuff, and I think it's shifted balance today. I like Ludwig Wittgenstein, the most religious atheist that's ever graced the planet. I remember reading Philosophical Investigations, his first book, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, was probably the furthest point you can go with traditional understandings of language. Obviously, the poetic part of David is interested very much in what he had to say and the way he was saying it. But the Philosophical Investigations is mysticism, pure and simple. An incredible aphorism somewhere in the book. Mysticism isn't an extra, I'm paraphrasing, an extra adjunct to the world. The fact that the world exists is itself mystical. That puts him as a cut above atheists, as they usually present themselves, and it's worth reading. It's clever, it's insightful, it gives a view of life. And Wittgenstein's obsession with personal purity, which really needs to come back into the world at the minute. That's not condemning anybody. It's not having a go at anybody, but it's saying, that's a part of our lives too. We like being pure. We like being authentic. We like being honest. It makes us more decent human beings. And yes, that's given to collective communal respect, and it makes us respect ourselves a bit more. So curiously, I was thinking about all that as you were going along, and I was thinking of something else. I mean, I sometimes, when so-called atheists start getting together, I think they produce very interesting material, curiously. I mean, someone was having a go at me a couple of years ago about how we all had to give up religion and lead our lives in this totally rational secular world. And I said, to which I replied, well, actually, that's been done. I mean, that was behind the Russian Revolution. That was behind the Chinese Revolution, both of which turned into bloodbaths. And if we want to be uncharitable, let's look at where it started in revolutionary France with the nightmare and Robespierre quite happily sacrificing all of his fellow comrades to the revolutionary ideal. I mean, surely that must show somebody something. Maybe not, but it should be. It should be showing us that in itself is not the end of the process. There's nothing wrong with being rational. There's nothing wrong with being a humanist in themselves, but that's not the whole of the story. The story of being human is much bigger. It's much more intricate. It's much more sophisticated. It's much more qualitative than that. My trouble with humanists, and some of my best friends are humanists, my trouble with humanists is that all they ever do is criticize the church. But how about when the church is feeding the hungry, trying to spread peace and goodwill? I can't think of a single humanist organization that does that. They all get together and bitch, but I mean, anyone can do that. I mean, what about doing something positive? And yes, churches do stuff like that. That said, I am interested when they're thinking about spirituality, because some of the most, if I think back to Wittgenstein, some of the most extraordinary spiritual statements I've read in recent years have actually come from atheists who still kept alive the spiritual impulse inside them. I think that's interesting. That's food for thought. And also, I mean, let's look at the unfortunate dynamics of revolutionary Russia. I mean, one of the intriguing things they did, from my view, is they didn't want to talk about religion. They didn't want to talk about mysticism in the traditional sense. But it struck me that the early party was very aware that these things were part of human experience and not only should not go away, but had to be discussed in a new way. They were looking for new vocabularies. They were looking for new ways of putting these thoughts together, of analyzing experiences, of analyzing supersensible constructions. I mean, if we're really looking for the origins of parapsychology, I think we've got to actually look at revolutionary Russia, because what they're trying to do is find an entirely novel, an entirely inventive modern way of discussing realities which the materialists in the party simply wished wouldn't be discussed at all. But there were other factions of the party that thought, well, no, I mean, it's part of being human. It's intriguing, and it's part of our experience. It's part of the human condition itself. So I think that needs looking at. As for, oh gosh, I mean, every time I say something about purity in this country, everybody starts jumping on me. Although, I mean, I'm quite a happy little puff pastor. I don't really want to change. Therefore, I'm not really telling people how to live. But the gospel, of course, does give us good guidelines about living in love and wisdom and truth and honesty, and I don't want those to go. So for me, today I'm accentuating the positive, John. My favourite composer, by the way, I think is Vaughan Williams. As much as I love Mozart, I don't know, for me, there's always something sort of technical and machine-like, churning out the wonderful in that sort of very Germanic way. That's no disrespect to Germans. It churns it out, and you think, oh my God, that's wonderful, but it's scary. It's wonderful, but it's scary. It's wonderful, but it's scary. And even the demigod Beethoven does that sometimes. And of course, who wrote voluminously on theology. Anyone that listens to Ode to Joy can't doubt the depth of his faith. But the writings on theology are just as fascinating. Puff pastors, famous puffs in Britain. I mean, it's Stephen Fry that actually is one of the great defenders of Wagner, Richard Wagner. People, it's unwise to forget the context and the struggle that each and every human being goes through, and the fact that we're not just all good and all bad and never change. I had heard a little about his struggle with anti-Semitism. I know you know a lot more about me on that. And yes, I seem to remember reading somewhere, that he was relieved that it was easing in him as he got older in life. I mean, that needs to be remembered, not just ignored. But my fess up, as Sajali, By the way, I'm getting new glasses. If I look at the moment at you, I can sort of see colours. And I know there's a laptop in front of me, but I'm not quite sure where it is. So yesterday I went to get some new prescription glasses, and I chose some wonderful ones that make me look slightly like Sigmund Freud. So I'm very, very happy with them. I'm picking them up next Saturday. And it reminded me of Roberto Assaggini. I think I've talked about him before, which for me starts the synthesis between the arts and the sciences. And I think one day that will arise. You know, what was that medieval dream? One day there will be a universitas literarum, a universal body of knowledge which enriches the whole human condition. I think that's still there. But it's on its way. It wasn't in the past. It's on its way. You know, Assaggini was a friend of Freud and a friend of Jung, who studies music, who studies painting, who studies creativity in all of its form. It was him that said, look, I basically agree with Freud. There is a basement, that's the id, and that's the scary bit, and we've got to understand it more. But Assaggini's great innovation was, by the way, if we're using the analogy of a building, of a house, every basement must be crowned by an attic. And what's the attic? Superconsciousness, higher conscious. Without that, we can't explain Mozart's masterful symphonies, as you said, 6 years old. It's just impossible. You know, and where do we look for religious genius other than in the attic of that particular house? For me, Vaughan Williams, the great romantic Celt of British music, typifies, I suppose, the soul, the folk soul of this nation. And I just wish religious types, I mean, other pastors and ministers, would acquaint themselves a little more carefully, maybe, with the thoughts of what the psychologists, the scientists are saying, as well as the artists. I think, you know, the level of knowledge of art amongst fellow clergy, I don't know what it's like in America, but it's pretty dreadful in this country. You know, you think, oh, God, get out of it more, enjoy yourself. Have you ever been to a concert? You ever seen a good movie? Go out and have a nice time, have a nice meal. You know, you might enjoy it. You don't know. Does God want you not to enjoy it? No, he doesn't. He wants you to go and enjoy it. You know, so in Britain, there are one or two people who've done exceedingly well at that. But I'd say, you know, your average clergyman probably hasn't, let alone things like parapsychology, and where monsters of knowledge like Assaggini are leading us, because that might be leading into a spiritual science which stands shoulder to shoulder with Steiner and stands, you know, at the dawn of a new type of humanity. So, as I say, I'm unrepentantly optimistic today. I'm not sure why, John. It's a rainy day in Britain again, but I am optimistic that all is well, as John Bunyan said. We have a big struggle, a big fight ahead of us, but all is well. By the way, the Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis is my favourite bit of Vaughan Williams. Have you ever heard it?
Well, actually, yes. I think that Ralph Vaughan Williams, in his full moniker, but the British composer Ralph Vaughan Williams is one of my personal favorites. I mean, it has such a wonderful pastoral quality. You know, it gives you the impression of walking through some of the lush gardens and meadows of England. You know, I mean, it's really what it is. It's like it's soundscapes of the British countryside, basically, and so in and of itself, it has this kind of elevated decorum that it typifies the how Britain used to see themselves, and before the vulgarization of the 20th century, and you see that here in the States with the vulgarization of music, so that consequently a lot of what is popular in music today doesn't really qualify, does it? Because if you get into understanding what music is, with melody, harmony, and rhythm. If something doesn't have a melody, is it music? Or if it doesn't have harmony, is it music? Or is it just rhythm? Is like in rap? And I'm not speaking against it, because I have friends that are in that whole scene and they have fun with that. But come on, guys. I mean, you can't go, okay, well, over here we got Beethoven and over here we got, whatever. I don't want to call anybody out, but it's not the same thing. It's more of like a broadside that they used to have kids on the street in London handing out broadsides. So and so did this. Get it right here, and get for a farthing or whatever. You get some blast against somebody who did something to someone about something. It's like the precursor to the newspaper. So that's essentially the way I look at that aspect of culture, that it's kind of fallen into its own hole. And again, not that I'm against anybody that has fun dwelling in that realm. It's just a question of, come on. I mean, you can't equate. There's no equivocation between Snoop Doggy Dogg and Mozart or Beethoven. I'm sorry, I can't do that. And it has to do only with the musical question. It doesn't have to do with the identity of the person whatsoever. And so consequently, yeah, Ray Fawn Williams is wonderful. Ode to a Fawn, it's like there's so much that is, it's kind of thematic, and it is there to set up your mood, to translate you into a mood, almost reverent mood, again, of what I was speaking of with King Arthur, and the mystery, the Arthurian mystery was seeing the workings of the Logos in nature. And so you have that kind of reverence of looking at the majesty of nature and seeing it unfolding before your eyes. It's just it's a remarkable thing. And so consequently, going back to this whole idea of the curmudgeon, what role does the curmudgeon play in the modern cast of British culture? And I hate to say that so much of curmudgeonly culture came out of that great fount of the curmudgeon, where you see really cast by Shakespeare in his plays, where you see it to full effect, don't you? So that curmudgeons play a big part in the plays of Shakespeare. And of course, he's poking fun at them. And that levity of spirit is that which I think is so important to any of this. Because like you're saying, this whole sanctimonious stuff is like next door with that. I mean, I remember when I was a kid of 9 years old, and we had this, I was going through, maybe a little older than that, going through catechism, and we had this kind of desiccated old nun, Sister Rosie, and she was maybe about, I don't know, 4'9" or something, and she made the pronouncement right at the beginning of class. Anybody who isn't Catholic doesn't go to heaven. And I raised my hand and I said, but my father's a Baptist, my mother's Catholic. She just shook her head like, too bad, he can't go. They're not going to punch his ticket. So consequently, these doctrinal issues, so this guy dies, and he floats up to heaven, and he runs into Archangel Michael, and Michael's giving him a guided tour, and he looks, and there's this hallway with all these rooms, and who's in there? Oh, that's the Presbyterians. Oh, what's these? Oh, these are the Baptists. This is the Jews over here. And they're going down the hall, and he gets to this door, and the door is closed. And he said, well, what's that? He said, oh, that's the Catholics. They think they're the only ones up here. So that's where I'll go with that one. But yeah, I think that when you get into understanding Wittgenstein, it's really fascinating, because the basis of a really British mathematical philosophy comes out of a blackboard drawing that Wittgenstein did one day in class, where he created set theory. And he was just, later on said it was just for example, he didn't make a big deal out of it, but yet it became like the fulcrum on which so many people like Bertrand Russell made such great work. There's a good story that goes with this. So my friend is a philosophy teacher in Toronto at the university, and the head of the department is quite proficient in philosophy, to be the head of the philosophy department in Toronto at the university. And his wife is, by the way, is a Waldorf teacher. But consequently, his personal struggle is in Platonic philosophy between wholes and parts, and what is the relationship between wholes and parts. That's the Platonic dilemma between wholes and parts. And so one day, one of his graduate students was presenting his paper, and I've told this story before, but it was a long time ago on the show with Leo. So anyways, he goes before the class and he says, there are natural languages in which a positive and a positive equals a positive. A negative and a negative equals a negative. A negative and a positive equals a positive, and a negative and a positive equals a negative. But there are no natural languages in which a positive and a positive equal a negative. And the department head from the back of the room, yeah. So there you have it. The spirit of mirth conquers all, and so much for that doctoral thesis, and that's the majesty of philosophy. You have to keep in mind that almost exclusively philosophical works were written by college students, right? It was written by guys that are 18, 19 years old, right? And then they spend the rest of their life defending their thesis. Likewise in physics, like Einstein, it was stuff he came up with to a large extent as a very young man, and then consequently he spends the rest of his life dealing with people arguing with him. And so that's a good thing. But I think that when you get into Bertrand Russell, and even Bertrand Russell himself, who considered himself an atheist, but he couldn't deny that good had come from the culture of the church and that whole spiritual culture, that it had created good effects. Just as you're saying, yeah, okay, you could say all that, but look at all the work that the church does in the community. And so it's that doing thing, and that is that whole kind of Saturn mystery that's beyond the reach of many people. It enters right into the will. It's not what you think about that stuff, it's what you do about it. And it's so consequently, if you look at your friend Emanuel Swedenborg, look what he did. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic. I mean, here in America, people basically, unless they're members of the Swedenborgian church, they're pretty oblivious. In Freemasonry here, they're pretty oblivious unless they're scholars of Freemasonry, because Emanuel Swedenborg played such a huge role in the upper degrees of Freemasonry, whether or not American Masons might even know that. But he, like Goethe, was a member of literally over 100 scientific societies, and was one of the greatest and most respected minds in the world. And so consequently, coming to understand such a thing, a great deal of help can be achieved by reading Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts by Reverend David William Parry. And I'm happy to have this book and his two other books, The Grammar of Witchcraft, and no, it's not a book, a witchcraft book. It's not a grimoire. It's a grammar. It has to do with a Shakespearean study, so don't get that one wrong. This is closer to what you might think that was, Caliban's Redemption. But again, it's a poem inspired by Shakespeare, so that David tends to dwell within the central. He's right on the bow of the ship of British culture, trying to navigate the waters, and so it's invaluable. And you can get those books. They're available on Amazon, the dreaded Amazon. And here's my first book, Touching on the Grail. It's basically a book on angelology and history, the spiritual science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail. And it's a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner, the esoteric streams of Christianity that flowed from the Brotherhood of the Golden Grail to the Order of Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. My second book, I don't have a copy laying around in front of me, I don't think, because I had one here and somebody bought it. There it is, The Arcana of Light on the Path. That's more of a meditative tool. But in both of my books, there's just literally just diagram after diagram laying out all of these mysteries so that one can understand the relationship to the supersensible. And which is the crux of our conversation here, is do we have a language that's capable of embracing the input of the spiritual world? And that's what's being lost. And you go to Shakespeare, he had a vocabulary in excess of 10,000 words. You go to the average individual today, they're lucky if they use 1,200 words. And that is even the simplest individual could see where you could have a problem. Because really, if you don't have the word, you can't think the thought, right? I mean, I think that's the way it works. I mean, you could get along pretty good if instead of me saying, hey, Reverend David, I just said, hey, you. I mean, I might get your attention, but if I was in a crowd, maybe not, so if you know the words, that's what gives you the connection. And that's the mystery. That's the sixth mystery, the mystery of the Logos. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And how is that true? What is truth? This is what we're supposed to be working on here. Not that we're going to find any answers necessarily, but that we're going to approach these subjects. And when you get into people like Wittgenstein, who was almost painfully honest, I mean, he literally took himself to the very limits of his capacities. It's like he's just about to walk across the threshold into the spiritual world, because he took everything that he could develop association with in his conscious mind, and yet he's still gazing and he's looking. It's like he's going, I know you're up there. And so there's the honesty there that's just refreshing, even though it's shall we say concentrated language? Yes, that it's it's not the easiest thing, but see, it's through taking up tasks that are challenging that we develop. And that's being taken away in modern education. Oh, it's not fair to make the courses so difficult. We got to make it fair for everybody. So let's like dumb it down, and then everybody can get up. Instead of winning an award, they get a trophy for they participated. They were in the room. Okay, that's a real honorium. I don't know. It just becomes absurd to me, that they want to base culture on the lowest common denominator. And what is that? Well, it has to do with the big plan that everybody tends to talk about. The plan of the elites is to eliminate the middle class. And all this stuff going on, it has to do with striking down small businesses. And then once the small businesses are out of the way, then the big corporations can expand and just take over culture. I won't even say human culture, because that's inhuman culture. And so consequently, with the massive protests that are going on as we speak in Berlin, which with somewhere, some reports are saying between 500,000 and 1 million people are all there on behalf of liberty, right? Being freedom from being under this lockdown situation. Likewise, in London's going through it. I don't know what the numbers are at this time, but it just shows you that there's something that lives within the human breast that is akin to Schiller when he says that you are most human when you are at play.
A quick response, because I know we're getting short of time. Snoop Dogg, if you ever listen to this show, John Barnwell may not. I think it'd be an extraordinary. We can storm the stage together. I think the Bernie Sanders mob, but again, I actually knew Bertrand Russell, so I know for a fact that he came from a Quaker background himself. He came from sort of Christian. He could actually make sense of why people would want to become completely against faith. I know that. Thank you. I've got a Wittgenstein story, if the gremlins don't keep cutting me off. When I was an undergraduate at King's College London, I actually took some classes with Norman Malcolm, who of course was American and a personal friend of Ludwig Wittgenstein. And we all heard, I mean, it's a well-known story, but we heard it from the horse's mouth. Speaking of curmudgeons, if ever there was a moody old bugger, it was Norman Malcolm. Wherever you are nowadays, Norman, I hope you heard that. You were a moody, scary bugger, okay? So anyway, we all had to file in with a copy of Wittgenstein under our arms, and someone had the guts to say, "Well, is this anecdote true?" And there's a story of where he got completely drunk with Wittgenstein in Oxford, and they were walking back through the fields late at night, and there was a celestial configuration of stars in the sky, and Norman Malcolm said to Wittgenstein, "Look, that is an M in the sky. It must mean Norman Malcolm." To which Wittgenstein replied, "No, you silly bugger, it's obviously a W upside down." So, so, so I have had experiences of curmudgeons of my own. Gosh, where do I go with that? You see, I don't know. I'm still accentuating the positive. I see us on the threshold of a new and better world. I don't want, in the sense of culture, to be an either or. Maybe in the sense of religion, yes, but maybe not in the sense of culture. You know, I want to be able to have Snoop Doggy Dogg in the world, and I want to be able to have Beethoven in the world. And what I don't want is what modern culture is doing, by saying have one without the other. Yes, Snoop Doggy Dogg is good, Beethoven is not good. That is barbaric. That's the neo-barbarism. And also, it's not human. Why can't both be enjoyed and celebrated? I don't understand that at all. When I was an undergraduate, I mean, part of my background is Welsh. I had a very healthy thirst. Some of my background is Irish. So we used to drink a great deal, I confess it. And what were we doing? We were talking about French novelists, drama, poetry, movies, film, the arts, dance. And I treasure every single one of those conversations to this day. Did people ever talk about relationships? Yes. Did ever people talk about football or rugby? Yes. But we also talked about those other things as well. And it made, what's that modern phrase? It made a very rich mix and wonderful alchemical elixir to drink and quaff of the human condition. It was enlightening, it was exciting, and I think in cultural terms, we need a both and instead of an either or. I hope you heard at least some of that, John, because I kept cutting out. The Bernie Sanders mob were trying to silence me, but I won't go quietly. I hope you at least heard some of that.
I'm sorry, I was. You caught me in another screen, and I'm trying to bring up something here. And well, in any event, you could find David's books on Amazon, like I said, and my books are available on eBay. Don't try to get them elsewhere, or you will have the problem of getting ridiculous prices. But if you want to buy me a cup of coffee, it's paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And if you'd like to buy David a cup of coffee, he gets thirsty too, and he does love coffee. That's paypal.me/ is it D Parry, Parry? Is that 777? I remembered. So an old curmudgeon like me still can keep track of certain details in life. Yeah, in getting back to some of that, you know, it's not, you don't want to be the inverse curmudgeon where you're being curmudgeonly about the curmudgeons, but it's the point of that you have to meet these things and be part of that grand company, right? We, the champions that are championing the reality of the spiritual world, because there's going to be all these minions out there that have probably don't even own any books, so they don't have any idea what we're talking about, and they're not here right now listening to us anyways, and so good luck with that. Did you say Imperial College London you went to? Did you say that? Oh.
King's College, London.
Okay, good. Okay, interesting. In any event, I think we're getting near the end of our journey here, and I enjoy it so much. And for those of you that want to try and understand these things, it would behoove you to pick up some of our books. I could give you kind of a guidepost, and you can realize that that's what we've been talking about all along. It just carries the work further. And I thank everybody that's purchased our books up to this point. It has bought us cups of coffee and beyond. And that's a wonderful thing. And I want you all to enjoy your work, enjoy your week. And now, if you could, David, lead us in a little bit of prayer so that we can consecrate this moment as a community.
Just one word quickly about reading books. I remember that very gifted comedian, Chris Rock, who was approached at a party one night and somebody said he'd never read a book, to which Chris Rock replied, "And you're proud of that?" So books are good too. My friends, my colleagues, let the light of Christ, the light of the higher world, the light of wisdom, love, truth, and beauty be within you and around you in the days ahead, and lead you to the path where learning how to perfect things leads you to the very throne of perfection itself. Be of cheer. Amen.
Amen. And Queen's Wave.